In the field of academic advising, Dr. Virginia Gordon holds a special place. Her accomplishments are why NACADA has named its most prestigious award after her. As a colleague who has worked with her for 30 plus years, I welcome the opportunity to share elements of her work with which many may not be familiar. Like any great scholar, practitioners will take from her work what works best for them in their own context. However, considering her work as a whole, how she conceptualized and implemented an integrated academic and career approach can inspire those interested in academic and career advising today. Let's focus on how Virginia integrated academic and career advising to help students in this video. For me, Virginia Gordon was the last great progressive educator who hailed from the College of Education at Ohio State. Perhaps my bias comes from the fact that we had similar graduate school backgrounds. We were steeped in progressive education. Though Virginia completed her doctorate more than a decade before me, the progressive school of thought that guided her work is apparent to those familiar with the movement's principles. I highlight this background in the NACADA Journal article, Putting Theory into Practice, Virginia Gordon at Ohio State. Gordon channeled ideas John Dewey and other progressive educators promoted in her dissertation and other works. Dewey's efforts, such as how we think, experience in education, and interest in effort, are all implicit in all of Virginia's work. Her dissertation focused on training counselors to work with undecided college students. Gordon relied on the spirit of John Dewey's work by using students' goals and interests in academic programs or potential occupations as a foundation for her decision-making approach to assist them with their academic and career planning. Virginia proposed two primary means of promoting ideas from progressive education in her work. The first was more instructional, focusing on working directly with students. This was called the 3I process. The second was an advising curriculum, focusing on the intentionality of the advising program. Virginia's first approach, the 3I process, is more familiar to advisors. She proposes 3 steps for working with students on their decision making: integrate, inquiry, and inform. The process is an adaptation of Dewey's reflective thinking, which I will discuss more later. Gordon's second approach is developing an advising curriculum to guide practice within the context of the advising program. This element of Virginia's work is less familiar to advisors. The intentionality of the advising curriculum provides a framework to help advisors guide students through the decision making by aligning learning outcomes, resources, and learning assessments. With the advising curriculum, an advisor attempting to use the 3I process would be more successful in many ways than without it. The advising session would seek a balance between the student's decision making and programmatic goals as defined by the curriculum. So let's take a deeper look at Virginia's combination of a curricular and instructional approach for advising. Her approach is significantly different from the counseling or the customer service-based models that often dominate our field as frameworks for practice. Virginia successfully created the advising program at Ohio State for exploratory students in the late 1970s and the early 1980s. She anticipated the NACADA concept of academic advising, which was not created until 2006. This relationship between the concept of academic advising and Virginia's work is why it's worthwhile to consider how Virginia did it. After all, everything old is new again. Gordon's advising curriculum can best be understood by reviewing 2 documents. Please review the Exploring OSU Majors handout by Gordon and Steele, which help explains her advising curriculum. This handout complements the article Putting Theory into Practice, Virginia Gordon at Ohio State. Virginia's advising curriculum had 4 interactive components: self-assessment, educational planning, career or occupational planning, and decision making. Each of these components had learning outcomes. For students, these were written as questions, so they would more easily understand them. Additionally, resources were also included in the workbook Exploring OSU Majors. Depending on the student population, the curriculum was adjusted to student needs. First-year undecided students used the 4 identified curricular components. Alternatives, or major-changing students, started out with a curricular topic called stock taking. This unit was designed to help students review their past decisions and focus on how those decisions led to them wanting or needing to change academic and/or career direction. The curricular components for both these groups of students were unified through the interactions with the advisor using the instructional approach of the 3I process. Decision making is a critical component in both Virginia's advising curriculum and the 3I process. This decision making interaction could be in an advising session, a class, or a workshop type of setting. To help students organize their decision making, students used a variety of forms in the workbook to record their efforts as they developed their academic and career plans. These included attending academic and career information sessions and a variety of other activities. In the summary section, one can see the scope of the activities students engaged in to assist them in developing their thoughtful plans. These included recording results and reflecting upon the activities. Students and advisors would use the summary sheets in the workbook to guide their conversation while students were working on their plans. As previously mentioned, one of the key distinguishing characteristics of Virginia's curriculum was aligning activities, resources, and assessments to learning outcomes. In the 1970s and 80s, Virginia worked with OSU libraries to create a large room that housed all of the university's publications about careers, categorized by the worker trade group classification system, rather than the traditional Library of Congress system. This approach assisted students in linking self-assessment results with career resources. In the early 90s, Virginia was promoted to assistant dean, and I was asked to administer the undecided and exploratory programs at OSU. The first task our program faced was addressing the closing of the career library room. Opportunities appeared when access to the internet made it possible to deliver our advising program more effectively and efficiently. With a team of colleagues, Melinda McDonald, Gary Kennedy, and myself, we designed a website using Virginia's curriculum as a guide. If Virginia created a flipped advising approach using pen and paper, we started one using the web. The website no longer exists in its entirety, but several key critical features remain. A brief review can provide a clearer picture of how Virginia's curriculum really works. Let us first assert websites from the mid-90s look as bad as people dressed in the 1970s. That said, let's focus on its intent and functionality. The site had a section dedicated to each of Virginia's curricular components and included a section that described the advising program and the site's purpose. Each section of the site addressed a curricular component and included within it an introduction, the learning outcomes, activities, and resources. For example, students would take the Harrington O'Shea Interest Profiler, a version of the Holland Code, and then see how Ohio State majors would be related to the various interest patterns. This was done to help underscore the importance of interests as a part of looking in careers and educational majors, but also as well as introducing possible new ones that they had not considered. Under educational planning, the site gave us the opportunity to centralize all the programmatic information in one area rather than having it dispersed amongst many different websites at the institution. This also meant we could put up our specially made resources such as Senior Bank, OSU seniors whom we recruited to do informational interviews with our students, and have that on the web so that students could go to it and end up by doing their informational interviews in order to find out more about particular academic programs and also related careers. For career planning, the information session outlined what steps they should be taking each of their 4 years at Ohio State to develop and implement their academic and career plans. The section also highlighted critical information and activities they should be involved with in order to successfully implement their plans. The section also had a listing of resources. Some of these were resources that we had developed, such as Partners in Education. This was a resource that had over 1,000 OSU alumni who were willing to talk with OSU students about the major and career plans that they had developed and answer students' questions. Of course, we also listed a number of web-based career resources that students could use to help them find out more information about careers they were interested in. The decision-making section included a number of activities designed to help students organize and evaluate their academic and career plans that they were developing. This included one activity that was similar to the summary section in the workbook. Other assessment activities were designed to address other learning outcomes. We all recognize that some students might not need the complete use of the website for a variety of reasons, so we develop a needs assessment section with post-assessments to capture their work. The needs assessment section identified possible concerns students might have about their planning. By clicking on the link, they were taken to the sections of the site that would help them the most. The post-assessment activity provided them with a feedback form to express their reflection on the resources reviewed. Advisors found this functionality very helpful for working with students one-on-one and also in workshops. Hence, in 1995, we deployed a flipped advising approach for synchronous and asynchronous advising using the web. For those unfamiliar with the flipped advising approach, this included article shows how modern technologies like learning management systems and e-portfolios can truly enhance the curricular instructional model for which Virginia's advising curriculum provides a foundation. Let's refocus on the advising session in Virginia's 3I process. The 3I process is intended to guide and support reflection. It does not guarantee it. It encourages and guides students' critical thinking to help them identify their goals and integrate the components of self-knowledge, educational, informational, and career information into a viable plan of action. Virginia's focus on decision-making and critical thinking is central to her work with undecided students. In her book, The Undecided College Student, an Academic and Career Advising Challenge, she highlights much of the research about this population of students' difficulties in making educational and career decisions. The hindrances can be attitudes, lack of self-knowledge, educational or occupational knowledge, social, familiar, cultural influences, or just plain developmental in nature. As stated, to help students overcome potentially limited or underdeveloped decision-making capabilities, Gordon's advising curriculum and 3I process working together provides a framework for an intentionally developed advising outcome-focused approach to improve their decision-making. Bloom's taxonomies are perhaps the most well-known learning outcomes approach focused on decision-making. Therefore, considering how they could work in Gordon's interactions between the 3I process and our advising curriculum is instructive. Bloom's taxonomies have evolved since the original cognitive domain was created by Benjamin Bloom in the mid-1950s. With the work of other scholars, the addition of the affective and the psychomotor domain, the combined domains can help educators highlight elements of the reflective thinking process. By determining where the student might be in a decision-making process or where they might need help, the advisor can shift back and forth between the 3I process and the advising curriculum framework. The alignment of the advising curriculum activities, resources, and assessments with learning outcomes helps the advisor pick and choose where to start in the curriculum based on where students are at in the process. In many ways, this balance is reflected in Dewey's comments. I have often been asked how it was that some teachers who have never studied the art of teaching are still extraordinarily good teachers. The explanation is simple. They have a quick and sure and unflagging sympathy with the operations and the processes of the minds they are in contact with. Their own minds move in harmony with those of others, appreciating their difficulties, entering into their problems, and sharing their intellectual victories. Let us take a look at Bloom's taxonomy to explain this process. First, let us recognize that often only the cognitive domain is focused on in college. This focus can be seen on many institutions' instructional design websites. This is unfortunate because if we want students to make and share their integrated academic and career plans, all three domains are needed. Let's explore why. There are two general ways of viewing all three of the taxonomies that can help advisors work with students as they develop their academic and career plans. The lower and mid-level focus on attention, values clarification, understanding new information concepts, and skill development. The higher levels focus on ethical and moral formation and the emotional commitment to aspirational goals, evaluating and applying information and concepts applicable to developing academic and career plans, and the development of habits that will provide coherency and simplicity to the development of academic and career plans, both in the present and in the future. Let's first look at the affective domain, for after all, the affective domain is critical for academic and career planning. With the affective domain at the very bottom of the pyramid is receiving and responding to stimuli within the environment. This is mindfulness. In the middle, we have valuing. Valuing is making choices among options. Since there's an emotional attachment to things that we hold dear, making choices can be difficult. In the case of career advising, sometimes students might have a difficulty in responding to whether or not they might want more job security or higher income, or pleasing their family members. These are all values that are important but need to be clarified by the student. The top two levels of the pyramid for affective domain is where we end up by organizing our values into ethical and moral types of stances, and where we end up by holding them dear and they become aspirational for us to try to achieve. These aspirational goals certainly influence academic and career planning. Therefore, the purpose of the affective domain can be summarized as follows. Whereas the affective domain addresses the use of valuing and emotions, the cognitive domain works with mental states and mental processes. The use of logic and other mental functioning processes is a hallmark of the cognitive domain. In the lower levels of the cognitive domains, information and concepts can be introduced to a student to help them develop their academic and career plans. Concepts as simple as what is the difference between an occupation and a career can help a student clarify the planning process. At the upper levels, students are taking the informations and the concepts that they have learned and applying them to their specific case. And in the case of flipped advising, this also means a student creating an artifact of what they planned so they could share it with others. A summary of the cognitive domain would be as follows. By looking at and considering Carl Jung's work with psychological types, the dynamics of the cognitive and the affective domain can be better understood. Jung identified four functions of consciousness and he divided them into two categories of perceiving and judging. Sensing is taking in information through our five senses. The use of intuition, on the other hand, is when we make meaning of the information we are pulling in from our five senses. In general, both of these, if they are disrupted, will cause a problematic situation to arise. Thinking and feeling, on the other hand, are rational. Both of these are rational decision-making processes, with thinking being more closely assigned with the cognitive domain and feeling to the affective. The two attitudes of introversion and extroversion are sources of where an individual obtains their psychic energy. Introversion, internal, extroversion to the external world. Of course, what Jung claimed was that because we end up by having preferences in terms of which functions we end up by using and which attitudes we have preferences for, this ends up by creating different types of psychological types, but it also ends up by influencing how we end up by making decisions. The last domain, psychomotor, addresses how we actually physically interact with our environment. The psychomotor moves from the very base of its pyramid from involuntary movements through the development of skills based upon use of the affective and cognitive domain to the very peak in the development of habits. As advisors, when our students are developing their academic and career plans, we want them to develop good habits. Reading, writing, surfing the internet, and developing artifacts of their academic and career plans to share with others are all the skills students have to develop while they create a good academic and career plan. In short, we want students to develop a good skill set that will become habitual because, of course, they will be doing this again. As William James said about development of habits, habits simplify the movements required to achieve a given results, and that makes them more accurate and diminishes fatigue. In other words, it's a way of saving energy. Of course, the good habits we may be able to help the students develop will not always address future academic and career type of decision making, but it will give them a leg up on the process. It is my belief that Virginia's 3I process combined with her advising curriculum is the best way to help students develop academic and career plans. If there is a limitation, it's in her advising curriculum, which predominantly addresses only the first 2 years of college for students. However, her framework provides a model for how to address the junior and senior years and beyond. In the book Nakata published, Advising Approaches, Strategies that Teach Students to Make the Most of College, many advising approaches are presented as ways advisors can help students engage in planning. The list is long. Motivational interviewing, appreciative advising, strength-based advising, and coaching. Two key points must be noted comparing these approaches to Virginia's. First, these other approaches focus on teaching what advisors do, not what students learn. Second, the use of learning outcomes is barely mentioned in the index. These approaches avoid addressing how they interact with student advising program outcomes and how students should be assessed. These weaknesses undermine the professionalization of advising by not aligning what we claim with our principles of practice. Fortunately, a path forward is available. It's considering what Virginia did 50 years ago. After all, as John Dewey wrote in 1916 in Democracy in Education, to find out one is fit to do and secure an opportunity to do it is the key to life.